And a blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who makes us holy with mitzvot and commands us to engage in words of Torah. I always note we're not commanded to understand. I mean, we might understand, we might not understand, but we're commanded to engage. Just let's contemplate, do some study. And one might think on the surface, I mean, that applies very much to this week's Torah portion, which is the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy. And when you look at it, the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, it's a summary of where we've been and a suggestion maybe of where we're going. It's on a simple level, it reads like an itinerary. Travels. All of Deuteronomy is a story within a story. There's what they call a literary frame. It's a story within a story. It's a story of Moses telling the story of where the people have been wandering for 40 years. And begins, Eile hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. These are the Devarim, the words which Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan. It's interesting in reading this because normally you hear these are the words that God said to Moses. In this case, these are the words that Moses said. This is Moses repeating to the people what has happened. And in the third verse, it even says it was in the 40th year. So then the people are to wander for 40 years in the wilderness after leaving Egypt. So it says, it was in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, that Moses spoke to the children of Israel in accordance with all that the Eternal commanded him for them. So it's at the very end of these wanderings. And Moses is talking to the people about what has happened, but not necessarily what has happened within their memory. The point of wandering for 40 years is that this is not the same generation that left. That same generation wasn't going to be able to go in. They always wanted to go back. They wanted to go back. They wanted to leave when they were in Egypt, but afterwards they wanted to go back. It's like a lot of us. We don't like what's been keeping us back, but we know what it is, and then we just want to go back once we're out. And that's what they did, and so they weren't going to move forward. And but that means this generation, these people that Moses is talking to, they didn't experience this. This is new. This is Moses telling the story. In fact, this is the story of Moses telling the story to this new generation. And stories are important. Stories are how we know who we are. Stories are how we know what we're about. And when you're passing a tradition on, you're passing on a story. This is who we are. This is what we've done. This is what we're about. This is what we do. And so we are looking at the passing on of a story to the next generation, but not only the passing on of a story, also in some sense, the transformation of a story. Every time the story gets passed down to a new generation, especially if they're in a new circumstance, it is a different story. And that's also what's going on right here in the Torah. It's fascinating to see because it points out, how the text is pointing out how there's flexibility or how there's evolution of a tradition within the tradition, because up until now, what we've been reading about is an accounting of how this tradition is to be lived over the journeys, how this tradition is to be lived out by a nomadic tribe in a nomadic existence. But now the people, they have to prepare themselves to move into a settled existence where they'll be settled in the land, where they'll be growing crops, where they'll be living in thick-walled houses, and it's going to be different. But Moses is saying it's got to be the same. How is it going to be the same and different? It's going to be different, but it's going to be the same. And in this new generation, he tells the story a little differently too, because we read already in the 6th verse, beyond the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses, first of all, set out to explain this Torah. It literally says, Be'er HaTorah. Moses doesn't simply tell what happened. He gives an explanation. He starts explaining. The Eternal, our God, spoke to us in Horeb, saying, you have spent enough time at this mountain. You've probably all heard of Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, we go up, get some Torah, next comes down, breaks the tablets, goes back up. Sinai, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens at Sinai. Another word for Sinai, another name for Sinai is Horeb. So this account here is not starting with Egypt. The account that he's conveying to the people, this new generation, is an account that starts at Horeb, at Sinai. But it still has in it a lot of this hesitation. The Eternal our God spoke to us in Horeb, which is Sinai, saying, you have spent enough time at this mountain. You have spent enough time here. Pnu usu lachem. Pnu usu. Pnu usu. Turn and go on your journey. Turn and go on your journey. Get up and go. Start. So Moses then starts by telling the story of their travels, or really their parents' or grandparents' travels. This is what happened. This is where we went. This is where we stopped. This is what happened. This is what the people did. This is where they aggravated me so much. This is where they wanted to go back. They were filled with hesitation. And aren't we all? The story, though it doesn't start at Egypt, it starts in Sinai. It does not start with repression and victimization. It starts with a charge to build up and then to go and set forth. But as I said, it is a somewhat different story. There is transition built into the Torah at this point. And throughout our journeys as a people, we have experienced transitions. We went from being a nomadic people to a settled people. Sometimes I wonder if that's why we have Sukkot, this Feast of Booths. Nobody fully understands from an anthropological perspective why we have these Sukkot, these huts, and we build them outside our house. I do know this, though. I remember years ago going through the Navajo reservation in Arizona, and they had you'd see these modern houses and then these traditional houses outside. The Bedouin in Israel, they'll have these modern houses and they'll have their traditional house outside. I think it's very disruptive to a nomadic culture to have to move into permanent housing. So it makes perfect sense that you build these things right next to your house and live in there for a while to remember. Still, it's a change. We went through this when we left left the medieval period and moved into the modern period. Some of our families didn't do that till they left Russia. And Russia didn't leave the Middle Ages till the 19th century, or if even then. So when our people came to the United States, we were not only leaving Europe and coming to America, not only leaving Eastern Europe and coming to America, but we were leaving the Middle Ages and coming to modernity. When our people came out of the ghetto and were integrated into the larger Western world, that was a change, a dramatic change, and also in many ways a breakdown of Jewish institutions and of Jewish theology and Jewish practice. Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionism, which is all built on this idea that we've come through this tremendous cultural and sociological disruption, and now we have to try to rebuild a life based on tradition, but in a completely untraditional setting. Mordechai Kaplan sometimes compared the breakdown of Jewish life that we experienced in coming out of the ghetto to the transition that accompanied the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem. And we need to recall also that those two destructions, the destruction of the temple, the first temple, by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and the destruction of the second temple by the Romans in 70 CE, those were tremendous points of transition for our tradition. They were tremendously tragic. There was death, destruction, exile, physical exile, and spiritual exile. And all of Jewish life had to be rethought. How is it going to be lived out from here on? And that transition also, that's not been lost on other religious leaders. So in the 1980s and 1990s, the Dalai Lama was very interested in Buddhist-Jewish dialogue because the Tibetan Buddhists had gone through the same thing. They were centered around a temple or a monastery in Tibet, and suddenly they couldn't be there. How could the tradition continue? So the Dalai Lama started talking about this need to talk to Jews and Judaism. And some of my teachers, I know some of my teachers went and spoke to the Dalai Lama at the Dalai Lama's invitation. And one of my teachers said, even they talked about everything from things as sublime and theoretical as the substitution of time for space, as in we build cathedrals in time, as in Shabbat and holidays, rather than cathedrals in space. They talked about that, and they talked about Hebrew school and summer camps. I mean, so the Dalai Lama, Tibetan Buddhism is going through this transition as well. We went through that transition twice, and the temple still is with us. In many ways, our ritual points out the temple. We were just facing Jerusalem when we said the Amidah, is just one example. The more you understand the rhythms of Jewish life, the more you see the temple and the priesthood there all the time. We're simply acting it out outside of the temple. This destruction of the temple, which was accompanied with physical exile and spiritual exile, came to represent exile also. The destruction of the temple represents everything that is broken in the world, everything that separates us from each other and separates us from God. And a particular time of year, we stop and contemplate all that. We remember all of that. That particular time of year is now. It's what's called the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. The 9th day of the month of Av is next Wednesday night and Thursday. It is the anniversary of the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and of the second temple by the Romans in 70 CE. It is the most mournful day of the year on the Jewish calendar. It is a time of fasting for 25 hours, if you can, from sundown on Wednesday to sun to after dark on Thursday. There is no washing or wearing new clothes, and no eating and drinking. Wednesday night, the night of the 9th of Av, traditional communities come together. The lights are dim. We sit on the floor. We chant the Book of Lamentations, which is a poetic description of the destruction of Jerusalem. And we begin a fast, and we're not greeting each other. It's a very, very sad moment. And we are contemplating what is broken in the world, not only all the persecution that we've experienced, but hunger in a world of plenty, lack of medical care for the sick, extensive crime and violence answered by extensive incarceration, corruption in business, government, and religion, lashon hara, evil talk, the evil use of speech, attacks on human dignity. It's hard not to think about all of this stuff these days, with smoke pervading everywhere, excessive heat, wars in the Middle East and elsewhere, ongoing attempts by powerful forces within this culture to use brute power to reshape what the country is about, growing anti-Semitism, official xenophobia. There's a lot to contemplate, and we stop and think about that, mourn about that. Everything that's broken, the broken covenant. It's a broken covenant. The period of this starts 3 weeks before that, with the 17th of Tammuz. The 17th of Tammuz, which was 2 weeks ago, is the anniversary of the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. So there's this 3-week period where we are anticipating the destruction. The 17th of Tammuz is also 40 days after Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks. The Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, is the anniversary of the moment when our people reaches Mount Sinai. I asked about Sinai. We reach Mount Sinai around Shavuot. Moses goes up on the mountain, and how long is he up on that mountain? 40 days and 40 nights, and he comes back 40 days later, and what does he encounter? A golden calf. We've all forgotten about what we were there for, and now we are dancing around a golden calf. The rabbis refer to or compare Sinai to a wedding between God and the people of Israel. And turns out on the wedding night, the people of Israel are committing adultery. That's how bad this is understood to be. Moses shatters the tablets, broken covenant. And that's the 17th of Tammuz. That's the beginning of the 3 weeks. So, we have to have a time of the year when we really take a look at the evil that is around us. All the other holidays, we say, they tried to kill us, it didn't work, let's eat. This time we say, things didn't go so good. And there are times when things don't go so good. And the destruction certainly led to a different way of being for us. It is a charge, a challenge, and an opportunity for us to remember the brokenness in the world. Deuteronomy itself is dedicated to warning us about holding on to our ways, even in the midst of change and transition. The practices may evolve, especially in the midst of transition, but we still want them to be grounded in our story, grounded in who we are and what we are committed to, even when there is adjustment to respond to our new circumstance. While Tisha B'Av is about a broken covenant, the period that follows Tisha B'Av, beginning the moment that Tisha B'Av is over, moves into a time that focuses on comfort and conciliation. It leads up ultimately to a time when we are talking about repair of the covenant. When is that time we talk about repair of the covenant? As we start approaching Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. When we look into ourselves and we figure out how to reconcile with each other and with God. And Midrash says actually the second tablets of the Torah were given on Yom Kippur, when we become whole again. But for the moment, we're still, at this time of the calendar, we're in the midst of that brokenness. So not on Shabbat so much. It is Shabbat, so we will also contemplate what Yom Kippur means, which is the white fast, as opposed to Tisha B'Av, which is the black fast. But next Wednesday is Tisha B'Av, Wednesday night. I believe Bethel and Chizuk Emunah are coming together. I believe at Chizuk Emunah, or Bethel. One of those. Which one? Is it Bethel? And then at 1 o'clock or 1:30 on Thursday, there's a gathering. I believe most of the rabbis are participating at Kesher, Israel. Which I think just having everyone come together on the afternoon of Tisha B'Av is a statement, because right at that afternoon, that's when the mood begins to shift. And we begin to move towards healing and reconciliation as the day moves forward. One thing you'll notice is that Judaism is ultimately optimistic. We don't end on a down note. If a book of the Bible that you're reading ends on a negative note, you'll notice that usually a Jewish Bible will reprint the second to last verse, just so that you end on a positive note. Always return to hope. Always return to hope. Shabbat Shalom.